I want my books to make people think. I want them to have something to say about the world. But the job of an author is to entertain the reader. Hi, welcome to the very first episode of Beneath the Page, a podcast about books and the writers behind them. I'm Steve Couch.
And I'm Sophie Beal.
And we're your hosts for the podcast. Now, Beneath the Page was originally Sophie's idea. So for this first episode, we thought we'd tell you a bit about what we're trying to do. Sophie, what is the big idea behind Beneath the Page?
Often when I'm reading a book, at the end I want to have a conversation with the author.
Yes.
About how much of what went on was up to the character taking over and how much reflects their own values and their own beliefs. And particularly with YouTube now, you can just type it in and find your favourite author and then you get caught down a rabbit hole. So I thought we would add to people's ability to do that.
You thought we could create further rabbit holes.
Exactly.
And can you remember any particular writers? The first writer you can remember wanting to have that kind of conversation with?
Well, it sounds frivolous. Helen Fielding. I read Bridget Jones' diary in my mid-20s, but oh goodness, it resonated with me. Her life was very different to mine in some ways, but the emotions, it was a what, you too? I thought I was the only person who, when they got in from having been made to go out, typed in 147 into the machine to see if the person they were interested in had phoned them. But no, Bridget Jones had thought of that. Yes. So I wanted to have a conversation with her. How much of you was in Bridget?
Right.
And the truth is now, I know, she's admitted it herself. It was her in fictionalised form. There's a documentary called Being Bridget, and you can meet all her friends that it was based on.
Oh, wow.
Brilliant.
Because I remember, even before the book came out, when it was a regular column in The Independent, I wasn't a 20-something, 30-something single woman around London, but there was something about the character that connected.
How about you? Have you had that kind of experience where you've wanted to talk to the author afterwards?
Not necessarily wanting to talk to the author afterwards, but I often do get a sense that when you're reading a book, something of what the author believes about the world and the way they see things comes through. My favourite example of that probably goes back to a similar time in the 90s when Captain Corelli's Mandolin was the book that everyone was talking about, and there was an inevitability about the fact that I was going to read it.
Yes, I remember having to read it as well because everybody else was reading
but
it.
always someone reading it. At the time there was a huge fuss about the ending, which I won't spoil if there's anyone here who's not read it. It's a brilliant book.
People who weren't born at the time.
Yes, but there was a huge fuss about the ending. Some people loved it, some people enjoyed the story, but then the ending absolutely killed it for them. While I understand why people didn't like the ending, it was right for the book that the author wanted to write. And if you changed the ending to make it more what the discontents wanted, it would have said a completely different message about how the author sees the world. And that really struck me as a great example of how the author's worldview shapes the story. And authors can't help that. When we write, the stories we have to tell reveal something about ourselves.
Yes, I completely agree. Hence the reason for this podcast.
Hence the podcast. Now, Sophie, what can people expect from a typical episode of Beneath the Page?
Well, it's in development at the moment.
Yes.
We're hoping for lots of author interviews and probably quite a lot of discussion between ourselves, and we'll drag a few friends along. We'd like to ask authors in particular about the books that have shaped them.
Yes.
Yes, so sort of desert island discs for authors. But we'll see what happens. We certainly have quite a few interviews lined up.
Yeah. We're a work in progress, but the plans are quite advanced, and we're really excited with some of the guests that we've got coming up. And really looking forward to giving them the chance to share something of how they see the world and how that comes across in their books. One last question. You're a publisher. You run Cadence Publishing. You're also a qualified doctor. But tell us a bit about yourself as a writer.
Well, I have been writing the same story since our producer here, David, hello David, was a baby, and now clearly he's old enough to be doing our tech.
And doing a fine job with it.
But it's about two doctors who are brought up with very different worldviews. One is brought up within a Christian home, and another is taught he was a humanist secularist at 4. His mother leaves condoms in his room, and she's actively campaigning for the 2003 euthanasia bill. So just to give you an idea of how very different their worldviews are. But both of them find themselves rejecting those. And it's about the two of them finding common ground as they're estranged to different degrees from their families. And it's an overarching love story, really.
So it's
told in 3 parts.
It's a book about, to some extent, about worldviews and about people finding what they really believe over and above what has been.
Yes, revealing a lot of my own obsessions.
Revealing our own obsessions is kind of the job description of an author, isn't it?
Yes, basically.
That's what we do, whether we want to or not.
Yes.
Brilliant. Oh, well, thank you for that. I can see how, if that's what you're writing, I can see where the idea of the podcast came and that idea of what people really believe.
Very much so. So, it's my turn now to interview Steve. I did ask him some time ago if he would come on this podcast as a guest, and we finished the conversation with him persuading me that he'd be a better co-host. But I'm going to get this interview out of him anyway. I've written a number of questions.
Excellent.
And I haven't shown you... Well, I might have tipped you off about 1 or 2, but I haven't shown him any of them, because he's always going on about how we should do this to our authors. We should just get them on the fly.
Yeah.
Expose style.
Exactly. So Steve Couch is the author of Dead Man's Singing and Foul Fair.
Foul and Fair.
Oh, so sorry. Both published by the Book Guild. And we're going to get to those books just a little bit later on. But how did you start writing, Steve?
I've always written. I loved writing stories when I was at school. When I was at primary school, that was my favourite lesson, was when we got to do creative writing. At secondary school, I was that kid who was constantly writing stuff for the school magazine. The sixth form magazine, the editor actually put in the editor's column, congratulations to Steve Couch, who hasn't quite managed to have his work on every page, but came very close. But I never started writing fiction until I was in my late 30s. And I'd always wanted to write a novel, but as a young adult, I knew that the books that I engaged with weren't just entertainment, but I didn't know what I wanted to say. And the thing that I learned when I did start writing books is, again, what we've talked about. You don't need to know what you're going to say. Just tell a good story. And the meaning and the themes and all of that reveals itself. Something I'm very aware of. I want my books to make people think. I want them to have something to say about the world. But the job of an author, the job of a book, is to entertain the reader and to hold the reader's attention for the duration of the story and make them feel, yeah, I enjoyed that. And all the other stuff is secondary to that, but it comes out. So yeah, what actually started me in writing was reading children's stories when my boys, who are now 21 and 18, when they were little, reading bedtime stories to them, and some of them inspired me because I thought, this is so good, I love this book, maybe I could try and do something a bit like that. And others inspired me because I thought, this got published? Seriously? Surely I can do better than that. And it turns out it's harder than I thought.
Yes.
And I spent 15 years writing and failing and learning the craft of writing fiction before finally someone wanted to publish something.
Yes, you ended up actually publishing contemporary fiction for adults.
Yes.
How did that happen?
With writing children's stories, the age that I was writing for gradually went up and up. Partly because my boys were growing old, partly because I'd have an idea for a story that lent itself to a different age group. Eventually I had an idea that I just felt needed to be a book for grown-ups.
Yes.
I found it so freeing and liberating, and I just felt this is what I should be doing. All the things I'd learnt writing for children, about constructing a plot, about economy of language, all the lessons, they all got played out, but I had a bigger canvas and I was able to be more involved or more complex with the plotting. There was more room to breathe, and I was much more satisfied with the stories that I was able to tell.
Now, I can't do justice to the log line of Dead Man's Singing. Can you?
Yeah.
Tell us.
Dead Man Singing is the story of a has-been rock star who fakes his death to get his record selling and then goes out on the road as his own tribute act.
Which is the best elevator pitch ever. In fact, I ran the Bournemouth Writing Festival bookshop last year, and not actually having read this book, sold 20 books on the strength of it. I'm glad to say, and I have had to read it now, obviously for this podcast.
Had to read it.
Had to read it.
That's not such a ringing endorsement.
I'm glad to say it lived up to my own hype. So how did you come up with the idea of a Dead Man Singing?
I'm a big music fan. I always have been from teenage years. And I went to see a musician called Richard Thompson, and he did a song called Now That I'm Dead, which is from the point of view of a rock star bemoaning the fact that it's only now that he's died that he's making any money.
Yeah.
Sample lyrics: now that I'm dead, my agent finally said he wanted to have lunch with me. And it's one of those songs that stayed with me over the years. I found it online on YouTube, and
Good old YouTube.
and it was a song that I'd go back to every now and again. And then a few years ago, about 30 years after I saw him in concert, I made the connection of, what if someone actually did pretend to be dead as a career move? What if someone did that as a way of getting the benefits of being dead while they're still alive? And the story started coming together. And actually, Dave, the main character of Dead Man Singing, initially isn't faking his death as a career move. He's doing it because he's just had enough. The life of a rock star has paled for him. He's not enjoying what he does, and he wants to get out. And his manager says, "Well, if you're going to get out, let's get a big payoff."
Yes.
But then his circumstances change.
Now, your world feels really fleshed out, so I felt I was learning about the music scene as I was going along. Have you actually ever been on tour?
No, I haven't. I used to go to an open mic night as a student, and once I realised that the people who played could get a free pint, I started taking my African drum and my harmonicas along. I played mediocre blues harmonica, and I'd see which of my friends were playing that night and say, "Do you want any accompaniment?" We'd have a quick rehearsal in the gents, and I'd play, and I'd get a free pint. So I'm not really a musician. I'm an amateur hobbyist.
Inviting yourself along to other people's acts, even then.
Oh yes, there's a definite theme emerging.
There
here.
is, yes.
But I'm a lifelong music fan, and actually dipping into that was a big part of how I built the world of Dead Man Singing. The nailing down Dave's musical taste was a really important part of me finding him as a character. And I found actually that some of the decisions I was making about what music Dave would be into did help me shape the person he was. For example, he was big in the early 70s, so thinking about music at that time, I decided he would lean to American-influenced country rock, Bob Dylan, the band, people like that, but with a very British flavour on it, kind of the Faces and early 70s Who. That was my triangulation for Dave's sound. But I decided as well I didn't want Dave just to like all the music I like. There's a huge crossover.
Oh, so his musical taste isn't exactly yours.
No, there's nothing he likes that I don't like.
Right.
There's plenty that I like that he doesn't. He's 40 when we meet him in the book. I was 22 at the point the book's set in 1990. So for me, the book was something that was at first a bit frightening as a child, but then later there's an exciting energy to it. For him, it was a thing that was wiping him and his generation out of the charts. So anything that he would see as punk, he didn't have any time for that. But I loved prog rock as a teenager. Dave, I decided, wouldn't like prog. He would see it as a bit full of itself, a bit pretentious, a bit self-indulgent. And that led me to realising that for Dave, authenticity is a really big thing. And that's one of the themes that comes out in the book. Dave's search to be authentically him.
You've nabbed one of my questions, which just proves that you haven't seen these. So he's obsessed with authenticity, particularly in his music. It's quite ironic that he decides to fake his own death.
Yes.
But having said that, he's far happier pretending to be somebody else.
Ironically, as you say, he ends up finding for the first time in many years the authentic Dave at a point where he is posing as Tom, a tribute artist, performer who pretends to be Dave. So when he is himself pretending to be somebody else, pretending to be him, he's most authentically him.
Yes, and I really like that character development. I don't know how you would sum it up, but I would see it as self-absorbed rather than selfish, learning to care about the people around him and seeing far more considerate of the effect he's had on other people.
Yes, there's a theory, people who are famous, their emotional growth often stops at the point that they become famous. So rock stars who gain success when they're young, don't have a reason to keep growing up, and that's certainly true of Dave. And to some extent he's had a permanent adolescence up to his 40s where he's been irresponsible in how he treats other people.
Very. He doesn't know if he has any children.
Yeah. He was a rock star in the early 70s and lived the cliche rock star life where groupies and sex as a recreational activity is concerned. When we meet him, he's divorced from a long-suffering ex-wife who eventually decided she wasn't going to suffer him anymore. But over the course of the book, he realises that that's not satisfying and he wants more, and how he conducts himself affects other people. So that growing realisation, I was aware when I hit upon Dead Man Singing that people might pick it up for the concept. They'll only stay with the book if they get on board with Dave, and that needed him to grow, and that needed an emotional arc to go with the musical arc.
Yes, but what I liked and appreciated was that it wasn't just an emotional arc, it was based on quite a lot of plot.
I generally speaking, I like to write fast-paced books.
Yes. It's described as a fast-paced Nick Hornby.
That's a great description that I'm very happy to have applied. Nick Hornby is a huge favourite of mine.
Yes.
And yes, I think there's a lot of similarity in the themes and the type of book it is. I read a lot of crime fiction and thrillers. Chris Brookmeyer is another writer that I love. If I had to do a reductive description of what my writing is like, that's probably my best shot at that.
So it's interesting that music isn't just a part of the story, you depend on music a lot for the plot.
This is partly self-indulgent and partly because I thought it would work well. There are quite major plot points that turn on the release of records that happened at that time historically. The book is set in 1990. If someone tried to do what Dave did today, it wouldn't work.
No.
Because back then, if someone died, we'd all go out and buy their old albums. Now, if someone dies, we listen on Spotify and they earn about 10p. But that gave me the excuse to set it in a musical time that I A, remembered very well, and B, loved. And I set it in 1990 because that was when I heard Richard Thompson playing that song in concert. But it was easy to dip back into that period. And I've always listened to retro music, so music from Dave's heyday played into my strengths as well. But yeah, because of the rules of copyright, I can't quote lyrics in the book.
No.
You can quote song titles, but you can't quote lyrics. So there's a lot of instances where I have to describe a song without actually quoting the song. With some songs they're well enough known you can just refer to it. With others I'd have to describe someone hearing a song. Like for example, Now That I'm Dead, Dave actually hears Richard Thompson playing that in chapter 1 of the book. So I was able to talk about the slightly arch, mock, macabre, spooky voice that Richard Thompson was singing the song in.
Yes.
But yeah, trying to put the songs into words is sometimes hard. We went through with the Book Guild and there was a few times they said, actually there you're a little bit too close, you need to reword that. Most of them I could do. There was one that I could not get in at all, which really hurt to cut. A song which is referred to in the book called The Wait. There's a line in it where the singer describes feeling about half past dead, which I thought was a great line for Dave's situation, as well as his emotional state, and I couldn't use it. That's the one that really hurt me.
I hadn't noticed that, so well done.
Good. Oh well, that's good. And as someone who doesn't share my taste in music, the musical side didn't get in the way.
No, it didn't at all, which is really good for me, because I was attracted to it by your elevator pitch. I sounded like genius, and obviously I had to read it because of this podcast. But no, I wasn't put off by the music at all. In fact, I felt I was learning more about music and I was interested, which is saying something, because I had bought one vinyl record.
I'm tempted to ask what it is and then try and control my face so that I don't betray any reaction.
For comedy value, I was about 14 at the time. Glenn Medeiros.
Oh, okay, yeah.
And Nothing's Going to Change My Love for You.
I remember it well.
Yes, it's very cheesy. But I understand you've got round this for real fans.
I have a friend, a local musician, brilliant singer-songwriter guitarist called Ollie Hopper Pay, who sometimes appears with me at literary festivals doing a musically enhanced reading from the book. So I'll read a bit, and then when we get to a song, he'll come in and play a big chunk of the song, then I'll read again, then he'll play another song, and it works really well. Readers at home don't have their own Ollie to help them out like that. So I've done 2 Spotify playlists to accompany the book. The first one, called Dead Man Singing, is basically the soundtrack of the novel. It's every song that is specifically mentioned. The other one is rather more self-indulgent.
Yes.
There's a point in the book where Dave is preparing to go to his post-death life, and his manager tells him, you can't possibly take your entire record collection with you, take 100 albums. The playlist, Dave Masters 100, is one track from every one of those albums. Dylan and the Byrds and the Beatles in the mid-60s, all the way through to 1989. And it's a brilliant listen, because Dave's got phenomenal taste in music.
You see, I can't do that with any of my books. We'll link to that in the show notes.
Brilliant.
So music isn't just an integral part of the story, the plot depends on it.
Yes, absolutely. I wanted genuine moments in music history, the release of specific records, to be things that changed the direction that it was going in. There's a couple of instances of the release date of a record tying up with something that happens in the story and having an effect. There's instances of songs, that you'd hear on the radio at that time, which have significance. And I felt like the story needed that if it was going to reflect the world that it was set in. And it was a lot of fun for me.
So who came up with the title? Was it you or your publisher?
That was me. When I was writing the first draft, I was kicking titles around, as you do. And when I stumbled on Dead Man Singing, I just thought,
brilliant.
Yeah, it works. And they could have argued, but they didn't. They were obviously happy with it.
And do you think you've been influenced more by the books you've read or the music you've listened to?
That is a really good question. Nick Hornby, again, has written a book comparing Charles Dickens and Prince, and he's pointed out that the two of them probably put in the equivalent of 10,000 hours of ravenously consuming culture. Prince listened to loads and loads of music. Dickens would go to the theatre every night and would memorise chunks of performance, and that immersing in popular culture is a big part of what shapes an artist. Now, I know my place. I'm not Prince. I'm not Nick Hornby, and I'm not Dickens. I'm not a musician. But music has shaped me and shapes how I think about the world. And as we were talking about earlier, that shapes a writer.
So the second book is called Foul and Fair, and it's based in the world of children's football coaching.
Yes, but again, it's a book for grown-ups. It's not a book for under 12s. There's nothing particularly inappropriate other than it's a bit sweary, and in one scene very, very sweary.
Well, I'm sure that's very true to life.
I coached my youngest son's football team for 7 years, so I've trod those touchlines and I've lived that world, and it was really important to me to do an authentic portrayal that anyone whose kids have played football would recognise.
Where did the inspiration come from?
As I said, I coached my son Dan's team from under 10s through to under 16. And one of the things that I realised is there are 2 types of adults who get involved in kids' football. We're not talking about football with kids who might be professionals. We're talking just ordinary kids who want to play at the weekend with their mates. There are adults who are in it because they want the kids to enjoy their football and have fun. And there's adults who are in it because they want to win. It's a reflection of them. I am a winner, so my team will be winners. And if you're not going to make my team win, I don't want you in my team. And the clash of those 2 cultures is at the heart of the book. The main character, James, is very much in it's about the kids having a chance to play and enjoying it.
Well, he isn't.
But he gets sucked into a rivalry with Kieran, another coach.
Yes.
And for reasons that the plot makes quite clear, he has to win. This one particular season, he has to beat Kieran. And he loses his moral compass for a while, and he has to find it again. And at the heart of the book is the question of where do we draw the line between doing the right thing and getting the right result. And I've tried to avoid having just a pat answer with that, because it is a complicated question that all of us have to navigate in life outside of football. And it goes way outside of football in the book.
Do you see similarities between Dave Masters in Dead Man Singing and James in Foul and Fair?
On one level, they're very, very different characters, but on another, yes. James doesn't have any of Dave's irresponsibility or lack of regard for other people. That's not him at all. But both of them have got to a certain point in life and realise that they've lost their way a little bit. They've gone off track from what they thought they wanted to be doing, and they have to find their way back. And I think that reflects, in a way for me, starting to write children's fiction. My wife and I joke that that was my midlife crisis. And my wife has often said, as midlife crises go, it's not a bad one. I didn't go out and buy a motorbike and start having affairs with people.
No, it's much less
I wrote kids'
expensive.
stories. Yes. I was going to say much more fun. I've never bought a motorbike and had affairs with people, so I don't know that. But
It felt much more fun.
and certainly much more wholesome. So in a sense, both of those characters are men having a midlife crisis and coming out of it.
So, as we've already mentioned, you've been described as a fast-paced Nick Hornby, and certainly there's a lot of subject matter in common. Men of a certain age, football, music. You even share a birthday with Nick Hornby, is that right?
I do, yes. I share a birthday with Nick Hornby, the Football League, and the first Paul McCartney solo album, which is not a bad summary of where I'm coming from.
Yes.
And I'm honoured to share space with any of those.
I'm personally surprised that there aren't more books written about male angst.
I think there was a time in the 90s where there was quite a lot around. There was Hornby, there was Tony Parsons, Tim Lott. There's less now, but I think men are just as angsty as they were. As a society, we are more comfortable now with men talking about their feelings and their experience, and not just touchy-feely people like me, men in general. One of the things I do as well as writing, I am the club coach for Man vs Fat football in Bournemouth, a weight loss programme for men based around football. And it's brilliant. But one of the things that has grown up around our club, there's a couple of podcasts have been started. One is about men's mental health called 23 MPH, and the lads who do that get guests in and talk about their mental health journeys. But I think the fact that as a society we're more aware of that kind of thing suggests there's a market for books for angsty men.
Yes.
I certainly hope so. But it's, as with most authors, I write the kind of stuff that I would like to read.
So, how much are these two books autobiographical?
It's funny you should ask that. When Dead Man Singing came out, my first novel, lots of people asked me if it was autobiographical, which I couldn't understand, because it's a story of a has-been rock star faking his death and then going on the road as his own tribute act. I have done none of those things. Clearly, Foul and Fair is a lot more autobiographical. James isn't me, but he's much closer than Dave is. And there's a lot of incidents in the book which actually happened. Kieran, the main antagonist, the majority of the things he says and does on the touchline are things that either I witnessed or which other coaches said to me, oh, you never guess what that bloke at such and such team did this week. And lots of people have told me that they've met Kieran, people who live in different parts of the country and were involved in kids football at different times, which is hugely rewarding and gratifying as an author, and really depressing as a football coach.
Now, I know you're a Christian.
Yes.
Will you ever write about faith in your books?
I don't consciously not write about faith. If I had a story where that fed into it and belonged, then I'd be quite happy to do that. There's little touches, little nods towards faith in both of the books, but nothing particularly explicit, because that's not the story that it's telling. I'd like to think that the values that underpin the stories reflect my values, which are shaped to a large part by my faith, but I'm writing to people who want to be entertained with a book. It's not my place as an author to be telling them what they should think, just to ask questions. But sure, that my faith is part of who I am, and therefore it's part of what I bring to a book.
I recognise that. So, what are you working on now?
I'm at an interesting point. I've finished writing what I hope will be my third book, which is called Imogen Imagine, and is about a woman whose life gets completely disrupted when her ex-boyfriend has a massive hit single with a song about their breakup, which doesn't tell her side of the story at all. And she decides to do something about that to set the record straight, with far-reaching and unforeseen consequences for both her and her ex.
So, more music.
After Dead Man Singing had been accepted for publication and I'd signed off the text with the publisher, so that was done, I discovered a song by a singer-songwriter called Grace Petrie called No Woman Ever Wants to Be a Muse, which basically takes to task songwriters taking other people's experience and using it for their art, misrepresenting them in the process. And it dawned on me that there was another side to the story that needed to be told.
Because that's exactly what Dave does.
To some extent, there's a character in Dead Man Singing who becomes Dave's muse, and while I don't feel I've treated that character badly in the book, that's not always the case. And I think there's a challenge for us as authors in that it's easy for us to base characters on other people, and sometimes it's not our story to tell.
So, Imogen, or Imi, is a 21-year-old woman.
Yeah.
What have your early readers said about this? I mean, clearly you are not.
I was very aware that it was stepping out of my comfort zone in terms of my central characters. But I think reading a novel is an act of empathy. We are trying to connect with another character, to get into their head and understand them. And as authors, we do the same. There are female friends who I asked to read the book and specifically said, have I got Imi's voice right? Does she sound like a 50-something man trying to put on the voice of a 21-year-old woman? And they said no. Voice is fine.
Happy.
She's believable. She's authentic. So, because if that didn't work, the whole story would fall apart. That's out on submission at the moment.
Brilliant.
I have the idea for what I hope will be book 4, another standalone. I've got the plot scoped out. I haven't started writing yet, but I'm so excited. It's an old idea that I've had kicking around for ages that was waiting to connect with the thing that would make it fly, and suddenly I realised what that was.
Can you give us any hints?
I don't want to, because it's so early on, but it is another nice hooky concept like Dead Man Singing.
Well, something for us to look forward to then.
And I'm sure I'll come and talk about it at any opportunity.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Well, thank goodness he's gone.
I thought he was rather nice, actually. I thought he seemed like a thoroughly interesting man.
Well, I'm hoping the next one's better.
I don't know about better, but it's certainly a really good one. The next episode is going to be us interviewing Alice G. May, whose latest book, The Resistance Girls, is about to be launched this weekend at the Bournemouth Writing Festival, and it was a really good chat we had.
Really good, yes. So if you want to hear more from us, please subscribe on whichever platform you're listening. And if you really want to support us,
you could leave a review. If you like what you've heard, that would be great. Just giving us a starred review is absolutely fine, but it really helps people to discover the podcast for themselves.
So thank you, and we'll see you next time.
See you next time.